It's nearly a decade since the Black Lives Matter movement began.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Since then, it's been celebrated and admired for shifting public opinion on race and policing. It's also been criticized, accused of mismanagement of funding, and blamed for inciting violence. These days, you may not have heard much about Black Lives Matter in the news or around town. Has the movement, which inspired unprecedented global solidarity after George Floyd's death, lost steam? We asked dozens of residents to share their thoughts and if their views had changed since they first learned about the movement. Here's the thing. Generally, I can get people to agree to an interview quickly. Not with this story. This one was different. People were hesitant to share their thoughts out of fear of being condemned or misunderstood. Some felt the topic was too political and that no matter what they said, their words would be used against them. But some of the most interesting interviews I did were with people who had more questions than answers and whose views have changed over time, but not necessarily hardened.
My first impression of it was really very positive. Black Lives Matter. I heard about it after the Tamir Rice incident. So Black Lives Matter to me really resonated.
I remember the first time I ever saw the words Black Lives Matter was Facebook. And I just remember being like, what is that? And clicking on it, there were a lot of opinions and I didn't know what to believe.
That's Richard and Sarah. Now, their initial impressions of the Black Lives Matter movement were influenced by where they were living when they first heard about it. Richard in New York, Sarah in North Carolina at the time. They were also impacted by their upbringing, work, personal relationships, and the news. We should add, Sarah agreed to speak with us on the condition of anonymity.
I felt like the way that the protesting was being portrayed in the media, it made it very much like us versus them, or them versus this person. Also, when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, I was in a very serious relationship, and that definitely did impact me because I lived with that person. So if that's the only perspective you're really hearing, you just kind of take that, and even if you're not taking it seriously, you absorb it.
I was very aware of the civil rights movement. So it was a very enlightening. I was very enthusiastic about hearing more about them. Who are they? What are they? What are they doing? Why are they on the scene here at this killing? Started reading about how they are raising awareness of this epidemic of murdering Black men. And so you want to know more about them, who they are. So that was my quest, was to find out more about them.
Richard and Sarah see themselves as service-oriented people. They live to help others, and given the work they do, they have a different vantage point of the hardships and the opportunities in our community. Interestingly enough, it was through the lens of their work that those initial perspectives on this social movement were challenged.
I'm a journalist, I follow these things. I was really kind of interested in maybe doing a documentary on Black Lives Matter. I did some initial research, and I've been following it for a while, but then it kind of soured me when you start seeing them infighting, and I don't really want to get involved with putting that kind of thing out there. It's out there, but I don't want to exacerbate it. I don't want to have anything to do with that. They really got the attention of major corporations, and that money started pouring into them, tens of millions of dollars. It was upsetting for me to see them take that beautiful opportunity that they were given, that they were in the sweet spot. They were in the right position. And it was upsetting to me to see how they squandered that because of the financial situation and casting doubt on what they were doing. And then there's the infighting, the fighting amongst themselves and the lawsuits amongst themselves. They just really messed up. If you betray the trust of the public, there's doubt. And when you have doubt, that chips away at your credibility. And I think that's what I find with them right now. There's too much doubt in the Black community about what they're doing.
I am a community-based therapist. So with our job, we go into people's homes. I think the biggest thing I've learned is that at least in my world, it's the mental health world. And then if you have a person of color with a mental health issue, it kind of goes from like 0 to 100. And when the police are involved, it goes from like 0 to 100 versus, okay, like, there's just this crazy person over here. It's like there's this dangerous, crazy person over here. And just seeing the way that they get talked to when we have those situations is very much like, all right, like, is that necessary? Could we chill out a little bit? They are legitimately scared for their lives. And that's a scary situation to kind of be in as an outsider, because I can't be like, oh, you're fine. Like, nothing's going to happen. I can't promise you that. Before, I didn't have a job where I really had to be out in the community, and I'm white. I don't have that same, unfortunately, like, I don't have those same experiences. So it was something that I didn't really understand. And now I'm like, all right, like, I get it. I get what's happening. I get why people are pissed off, and I understand why things need to change.
These are two pretty substantial shifts. Now, to clarify, it's not that Sarah and Richard flip-flop their views. It's that their learnings and experiences have changed their perceptions of the movement. This is probably a good time for some background. Black Lives Matter, the slogan, was born in 2013 in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman and the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black teen.
The shooting death of a black youth in Florida sent out new shockwaves today. They reverberated from protesters to police as the public outrage grew, along with demands for action.
There will be no grand jury to investigate the February shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. The dispute over the killing of Trayvon Martin has sparked a national debate about race, justice, and when it is reasonable to act in self-defense.
The slogan evolved into a grassroots movement to shed light on police brutality and combat violence and systemic racism against Black lives. The Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, which is different from the movement, raised $90 million in 2020 after the death of George Floyd. And as you heard from Richard, there's been a lot of scrutiny about how that money was spent. Founding members of Black Lives Matter have said they were building the plane while flying it and regret not having taken the time early on to focus on infrastructure. Today, there are more than 40 individual chapters around the world, and each of those chapters organizes its own actions. As you may imagine, Black Lives Matter, the movement, and the foundation is facing a lot of questions, some of which Sarah and Richard have thought a lot about.
It kind of reminds me of, let's say you go through your life and all of a sudden you buy a lottery ticket and you win $100 million. How are you going to act? How do you act? How do you behave? I kind of get that sense that the people running this organization, suddenly they had tens of millions of dollars put into their bank accounts. And it's like, well, what do? We don't have the expertise. They didn't have the expertise around them. I would like to understand who was in charge, who's taking care of the finances. The public needs to know. The public deserves to know more about this. And I think that's lacking right now.
I just have a lot of questions still, and money's part of it, but also how are the actions being taken actually benefiting people? Because that's where I'm still seeing like a big divide is people are upset, but there's still police brutality. There's still people of color getting assaulted. Like, there's a lot happening still, and I don't necessarily know if what the intention behind the movement actually has gotten through to people.
Social movement experts say successful movements are flexible. They're practical and also audacious. They create relationships among organizers and seek to find a shared purpose among different generations. They're willing to negotiate. They produce a range of outcomes, and sometimes those outcomes are the development of new movements. This story made me realize just how messy, tricky, and complicated social issues can be for people. We think we have to pick a side, And then sometimes we're made to believe there's only one way to think about that side. A lot of us can relate to Richard and Sarah. Views on hard social problems and movements can change with time, and probably should. The more we understand that, hopefully, the more willing people will be to share their complex perspectives without fear of being shamed or labeled.